The Florida Gators have hired their secondary coaches. It is Darren Wilson and Vinnie Sunseri.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Gators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free if it's in the podcast and on YouTube. Happy Tuesday. Now I'm Brandon Olsen. Find me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with New York Giants on SI. Very happy. I'm not recording at like 2 a.m. this time, so that's great. But the Florida Gators hired Darren Wilson. And like I said yesterday, we'll talk more about them. We will also talk about the basketball team later on. Baseball, maybe tomorrow. But I wanted to talk about both Darren Wilson and Vinnie Sunseri today. We'll start with Darren Wilson on paper, right? Now, I'm trying to do this with as much of just on paper and information that I've been given when I ask people for responses on players or coaches or whatever it may be. But Darren Wilson on paper, we can look at this and say, because again, when we talk about recruiting ties for guys that don't have extensive recruiting experience, because while Darren Wilson has been on coaching staffs for 8 years, some of those were a GA. And especially 8 years ago, 7 years ago, GAs weren't doing much of the recruiting work, right? So when we talk about the recruiting stuff for Darren Wilson, there's really not much. So we're going to connect some dots, right? He's from Louisiana. That should help recruiting there because a lot of recruiting is not just, oh, are you a good salesman? It's, do you relate to me? You know, are you someone that looks like me? Is that kind of representation there? Because if it's not, that matters. That creates new barriers. It doesn't make things impossible, but it does make things more difficult. And so with Darren Wilson, you've got the Louisiana ties of now Louisiana players will probably relate to him better than they would have related to even Will Harris or any other of the DB hires, right? So, which I will also say this for Florida and the state of Louisiana specifically, LSU did not do a good job this past recruiting class of keeping players in Louisiana, which is a thing that they have historically been. I'm going to say this, okay? LSU has, well, and by historically, I mean like the past like decade plus, LSU has had maybe the biggest stranglehold on a state than any other program because it's just LSU as the Power 4 program and for a while Power 5 program. It was just LSU. Texas, you know, there's Texas, Texas Tech, Texas A&M. There's other schools in the state. Florida, there's the Big Three, and now UCF. Georgia, there's at least Georgia Tech. Alabama, Auburn. California, there's USC, UCLA, Stanford. There's all these schools in all these states, but Louisiana has always been LSU. And this year was the first time that they really did a bad job of retaining talent in state. Now's the time to strike when they're still reeling from that. And so Darren Wilson could go in there and steal a kid out of Louisiana if there's a blue chip player that he's interested in. So there's that. He played at Southern Miss, which Mississippi is not just like, oh yeah, there's 25 blue chips out of Mississippi every year. That's not the case, right? There's a few blue chips, but they're really good football players. And I think that it was I think Mississippi has the highest blue chip player per capita or whatever it is, just because there's not like Mississippi's not a densely or heavily populated state, but considering that they have a pretty decent number of blue chips for a not well populated state. Playing at Southern Miss I'd imagine that, especially paired with saying, hey, I'm here on behalf of the Florida Gators, would help you get in the door of those high schools. Having that tie of, hey, I lived here for 4 years while I went to college and played football in the state. I came from out of state to come here. I'd imagine all that plays a part, right? So Darren Wilson, on paper, should be able to go into Louisiana, should be able to go into Mississippi, and should be able to, of course, go into Florida and recruit there. He's got defensive coordinator experience for 2 years at McNeese State, which honestly, I don't even care how it went. I don't care about any of that. And I spoke about this yesterday. For me, it's just really tough to judge a guy hardly on what he did at the place when he was there for 2 years, right? Especially when it's not a place that I'm tied into and always looking at. Like if it's Florida, I could judge a guy based on a year, even 2 years. Like I'll hear things about them. I'll know about them. I'll be able to give my opinion live as things are happening. But what he did 5 years ago at McNeese State, not going to be able to give a valid opinion there, especially when I know how things played out. Arkansas. Let's get to Arkansas, where he was for 2 years. I don't care about any recruiting things, whether good or bad. It means nothing to me with Arkansas. And you'll hear me talk about this a little bit tomorrow on the portal with Brian Smith, where, and I'll probably put it on Locked On Gators as well as a bonus show, but you'll hear me talk about that, where Arkansas, I don't care anything about recruiting in Arkansas because, one, they've been dealing with the same thing that Florida's been dealing with as far as like Billy Napier being on the hot seat. They've been dealing with that with Sam Pittman. All right. Every year they think Sam Pittman's going to get fired, and he should absolutely be fired before Billy. Let's get that clear. So there's that. NIL, horrible at Arkansas. They can spend the money. They have people that are willing to spend the money. They've spent it on coaches with basketball, right? But they don't with football, and they've consistently lost players because of NIL. I can't fault his recruiting for that, right? Like, I can't say he's a good or a bad recruiter if they're not willing to pay kids. So I say all this to say that on paper, Darren Wilson should be able to go into multiple states and establish some sort of pipeline there. On paper, Darren Wilson has defensive coordinator experience and is coming here and was recently hired to be a defensive coordinator again and is coming here to be a position coach. On paper, this is a really good addition, right? And the thing is that the only question mark I truly have about him is the recruiting. On paper, he can go out there and go into multiple states and have some kind of leg or foot in the door, right? But it's about actually going out there and doing it. Like, you do still need to be a good salesman. Even in the era of NIL, when you can buy players, you still do need to be a good salesman, because the way that recruiting usually works is not usually, oh, whoever pays me the most, that's where I'm going. It's, these are the 8 schools that I'm willing to go to. Whoever pays me the most from these is where I'm going. That's how it goes. So you still have to get yourself into that list where you can go, hey, fine, we're in the list. Let's pay and let's get them. Like that's what you got to try to do there. That's the part where it's like, you got to be a good enough salesman to get the kids. That's where it comes in. So for me, it's just about actually seeing him put it into action recruiting wise. Again, I've spoken to multiple people at this point, and they've all said positive things about him. They've all complimented him as a person, as a coach, all that. Now it's just about putting it together as recruiting. I feel good about him as an on-field coach. Based on what I've been told, I feel good about him as an on-field coach. It's just a matter of, how is he going to play out his recruiting? I don't know. I really don't. I can't answer that. We're just going to have to wait and see. But as far as it being a good hire, so far I feel better about it than I do about the Vinnie Sunseri hire. Easily, by far. We'll talk about Vinnie Sunseri when we get back with Locked On Gators. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was dealing with piles of paperwork and frustrating forms, and then waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. And now Taxes is easily uploading your forms to a TurboTax expert who's matched to your unique tax situation. Working in media, we don't get all the same tax stuff as the everyday folk. Ours is way more not complicated, just silly, I'll say. I'll be honest about that. But with TurboTax, there's an expert who's backed by the latest technology, which cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on my taxes and your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress, and you get the most money back guaranteed, all while you go about your day. So no stressing, no worrying, no waiting. Now this is taxes. This is Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app, and see guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day, every day. We are available daily and free, whether it's in the podcast and on YouTube. And like I said, Florida Gators hired Vinnie Sunseri and Darren Wilson. I feel better about the Darren Wilson hire than I do about the Vinnie Sunseri hire. So I'll say that. I will also say that we're going to look at Vinnie Sunseri the same way we looked at Darren Wilson just now, right? We're going to look at an on-paper approach. This isn't about so much my opinion of the guys. This isn't so much about me saying they're qualified or not qualified, which I think that when we talk about the on-paper approach, you can kind of piece that together, right? Like I think a lot of people can piece together if by reading someone's resume, if they're qualified or not qualified. I don't think that's a super difficult thing to do all the time. And we can say for Vinnie Sunseri, born in Pennsylvania, grew up in North Carolina, went to college in Tuscaloosa, born in Pennsylvania, went to high school in North Carolina, finished high school in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, went to Alabama to play football there. And then he went to the New Orleans Saints, where he had, a cup of coffee as a player. He was there for, I think, one season, if I'm not mistaken. It was just the one season. Son of a coach. That's one of the reasons that, he was born in Pittsburgh, is because, when he was born, when his dad was a coach at Pitt. Duh. Grew up for a bit in different states. Why? Mostly because that's where his dad was. Why did he go to high school in Carolina and then finish high school in Alabama? Because his dad was with the Carolina Panthers, and then his dad went to Alabama. And those happened to be the times that Vinnie Sunseri was in high school and then finishing high school. And then, of course, Vinnie Sunseri went to Alabama. Stuff like that. Not super difficult there. I will also say this isn't so much a nepotism thing. Vinnie Sunseri was a blue chip kid coming out of high school. That's not so much, oh yeah, nepotism did that. He was a good football player, right? He was a good recruit, multi-year starter at Alabama, played a lot, was a significant contributor. I will also say that on paper, you can look at someone who you could say, hey, his dad was a longtime coach. Possible that he's going to lean on him to kind of speed up his development as a coach. Absolutely. You could say all of that, right? And then you go from Vinnie Sunseri's playing career to his coaching career, and he started as a GA at Alabama. Then he was a defensive coaching assistant with the New England Patriots. And then he spent 3 years as the running backs coach of the New England Patriots. Then he spent 1 year at Washington, the University of Washington, not Washington Commanders, University of Washington, as a safeties coach. And then he went to Florida then he got hired as a Jacksonville State DC, and then he came to Florida without ever being a DC. Because I remember when Vinnie Sunseri got hired, there were quite a few people in my comment section like, I don't like how he ran the defense at Jacksonville State. Cool. Like, you're allowed to think that, but he didn't run the defense at Jacksonville State. Ever. He was just hired and then came to Gainesville. So, no. But I will say this. And I also, like, I know that people want to go, oh, like him being a running backs coach is a good thing. Because now he knows how running backs operate on the other side. Now he can also help recruit running backs. Here's the thing. I think that, sure, multi-position recruiting is helpful. We have quite a few guys with the University of Florida that do that. I don't think being a running backs coach in the NFL for a couple of years matters there because you're not going to be working with running backs in practice. So I don't think that you being there really matters for them. So I will say that. I will also say that as a safeties coach, he should know how running backs operate anyway without being a running back. So it's like maybe he's better at it because of that. Absolutely. Valid concern, valid thought, valid whatever you want to call it. Valid. But this is still a guy who has 1 year of defensive on-field coaching staff experience. And that matters when we talk about the on-paper stuff, right? Like resume-wise, like I said, I don't think I need to tell you who's qualified, who's not qualified, who's whatever. Resume-wise, this is what we have. We could also say for Vinnie Sunseri, because Darren Wilson, again, was at University of Florida in 2022, so he worked under Billy Napier previously. Vinnie Sunseri didn't, but Billy Napier was at the University of Alabama while Vinnie Sunseri was at the University of Alabama. And Billy Napier had said that he spoke to Nick Saban, which, by the way, was a thing that we spoke about when Vinnie Sunseri got hired. Was I said, hey, maybe Billy went and called Bill Belichick and Nick Saban. We don't know if he called Bill Belichick. We do know that he called Nick Saban because he said it. So maybe he called them and got the okay, got the yeah, they're great, yeah, he's great, and went through with the hire. Maybe that's the case. Maybe. But on paper, I can't say this is a great hire, right? Again, I'm not bashing it. My thing with Vinnie Sunseri and even Darren Wilson to an extent is that we don't know enough about them to give genuine opinions. You can say whatever you want about the resume, right? Personally, I don't harp much on the resume because I am of the belief that it's not all about your resume, because then that would just mean that being young puts you at a disadvantage. That's what the resume means, right? Like that's, I think, a great example of it. Like, he's 33 years old. He's got 5 years of coaching experience. There are 30-year-olds with 8 years of coaching experience. Why does he have less experience? Because he played in the NFL. Like, that's why. So I don't care too much about why is he inexperienced? Because he was playing in the NFL. Like, he was an NFL football player. That's why he's got 5 years of coaching experience and not 8 or 9 or 10 or 12 at the age of 33. Because he was playing in the NFL. So that's one of the reasons I don't care too much about the resume. You can say on the resume he's not qualified, he didn't deserve this job. You can say whatever you want. Doesn't mean it matters. Okay? And I'll also say this, Vinnie Sunseri reportedly has some solid recruiting ties with Braylon Womack, 4-star safety out of Mississippi. But I will also say this. One, I don't know the validity of all these recruiting ties that he reportedly has. But there's also a difference between recruiting at Washington compared to Florida, right? This is big boy football. Okay? And I don't mean that as a knock to Washington. I more so mean that as who you're going to be recruiting against. That's what I mean. I don't mean Washington is not big boy football. I mean that your opposition for Washington, it's mostly Oregon. Right? Oregon State's not a huge threat. Washington State's not a huge threat. You own that. It's mostly Oregon. Well, Florida, you got Texas, Florida State, Miami, LSU, Alabama, Georgia, Auburn. All these other schools are in play for your same guys you're going for, and especially for like a Braylon Womack in the state of Mississippi, you'd imagine that Ole Miss is going to be in there, right? That's what I mean when I say big boy football. I would say for me, Vinnie Sunseri, way more of a question mark than Darren Wilson. Way more. Again, because Darren Wilson, I reached out to multiple people, and I know how they feel about Darren Wilson. Vinnie Sunseri, I reached out to people on live. It was like, I don't know, man. He was a safety coach 1 year here. I don't know what to tell you. Or people that I've spoken to, it's like, yeah, he's great. He seems like a really nice guy. He was a great coach for running backs, but that's running backs, not co-DC/safeties. There's levels to it. And as far as recruiting, we have no idea what he can do. None. So Vinnie Sunseri, way more of a question mark for me than Darren Wilson is. I love the Darren Wilson hire at this point. Again, on paper, I think it's great. And from what I've been told, I think it's great. We'll see how it actually plays out. But at this point in time, on Tuesday, February 18th, I'm saying that I'm a big fan of the Darren Wilson hire because of what I've been told, which is one of the same reasons that with Will Harris, I was down for it. Gerald Chapman, down for it because of what I've been told. Okay? So for Vinnie Sunseri, I don't have much to say. I don't know much about him there. But Darren Wilson, love it. We're going to flip to basketball to wrap up today's show when we get back with Locked On Gators. Thanks again for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free, whether it's in the podcast and on YouTube. Also, can we talk about how insane it is that basketball season is almost done? Florida has what, like 6 games left? 6? That's crazy. It feels like it flew by. And the SEC has a 500 record since January 4th, which is nuts. There's no dominant team that's been able to separate. Crazy. But I don't know how that one coach made the mistake, but I do love that everybody's made fun of him for it. But this Florida Gators basketball team has come so far, right? Yeah, I get it. They've got a fantastic record. They're 22-3. I remember I made a comment in our SEC hosts group chat saying that this team is just so hot and cold. And at the time, they were like, I think it was 18-2. I think this was when they blew out Georgia. And someone was like, oh, they're looking real great. And I was like, yeah, this team's just so hot and cold. And they were like, yeah, this is your record, so hot and cold. But I don't even care about that. I care about looking at the game and knowing what I know and seeing what I see, right? Like, we know, yeah, they've won a lot of games, but there were a lot of games they should have won by a lot more, and they didn't. And that's the thing that I'll bring up about why I think things aren't, or why I thought that earlier in the season they weren't as dominant as everyone had said, because I don't think they were. Simple as that. But this team has come so far from the SEC opener against Kentucky, which was their first loss of the season, from the Missouri loss, which was a huge wake-up call, I think, personally, and then the Tennessee loss, which off night. And look, I don't want to hear anything about me just pumping them up all of a sudden. Like, I spent all season when I've been critical of things, I've been hearing about how I hate the team. Because I did the whole, oh, this team's going to just give you some brutal L's, right? Like, there's going to be some brutal games in this season where you shouldn't have lost, but you did. Like this is a whole thing we talked about multiple times. And it wasn't me hating. It was me saying, hey, like, there are some flaws with this team where they escape by the skin of their teeth sometimes, and that's great to win the game, but it frustrates me when you escape by the skin of your teeth against a team that you should beat handedly. But the team feels different the past few weeks, right? I thought that the Missouri game was a wake-up call, genuinely. And we'll walk through this again for a second. Kentucky punched in the mouth by a great team on the road, as in you were on the road at Kentucky. Punched them out by a great team. Hell of a game still, 106-100. Still a great game. You lost by 6. And if I'm not mistaken, at the time, Kentucky was number 10. And you lost that game, and it happens, right? But that was one of the games where you're like, all right, like, look, some things just don't happen. Defense wasn't good at all. Okay, we'll move on. Missouri comes up a couple weeks later or a week later. They punch you in the mouth. They just played really physical, and they just beat you in Gainesville. And that was, I think, a big wake-up call, genuinely. I think that was more of a wake-up call than Kentucky. Because Kentucky, you went, oh, that's a great team, right? Missouri, at the time, Missouri wasn't the Missouri they are now, right? Like the time that Florida played Missouri was 13-3. They had lost to Memphis to start the year. They lost to Illinois a few weeks prior. And then they lost to Auburn bad in the first game of SEC play for them. Right? Then they beaten a bad LSU team, a scrappy Vanderbilt team, and then, of course, they beat Florida. So Missouri then, that was like the game that got Missouri a lot of respect. That was it. And even when they lost games after that, they lost close games. Because now they're 19-6. So even when they lost games after that, they lost close games. That Missouri game for me was the wake-up call for this team. They came out after that. Florida came out after that, blew out Texas. South Carolina scraped by the skin of your teeth. That one was another game where it's like, all right, like guys, you gotta tighten up. You gotta be consistent. And then they had Georgia blew out Mike White. Fantastic. Really bad game against Tennessee. That again was a game that I think was the biggest, I'll excuse it, I've ever given any team that I've been covering. Because that was an off night. Like there's no other example that you can give me for the Florida Gators shooting like just players. Elijah Martin shot 2 for 12 that game. Walter Clayton shot 3 for 13 that game. Thomas Huck shot 1 for 6. Denzel Aberdeen shot 1 for 6. Everybody shot poorly. They shot 34.6% as a team in that game, 14.8% from 3. That was what you see when you just see a team having a bad night. That's what that was. That's why I don't harp, or a bad day, because I'm pretty sure that was a day game. But that's why I don't harp too much on that game, because I just think it was just, hey, this is a good team that still just had a really bad night. That's it. They scored 44 points, and everybody shot poorly, other than like Will Richard shot 1 for 2. I guess that's fine, right? Like that's not shooting poorly. And Sam Alexis shot 3 for 6. But everybody else shot poorly. Everybody else played bad. So for me, like I just look at that game as an off night. And turnovers in that game weren't egregious for Florida. It wasn't anything too much worse than what we're used to seeing for them. So it wasn't even crazy there. It was just a really off night. And then, since then, beat Vanderbilt handedly. Beat number 1 Auburn, second time beating the number 1 team in the country. And now they're number 2 in the country, Florida is, behind only Auburn. Beat Mississippi State handedly. South Carolina kept it close for the first 10 minutes of the game, and then Florida ran away with it after that. But I think that Missouri game for me was kind of the wake-up call here for the team. South Carolina kept it real close for the first 10 minutes of the game, 12 minutes of the game. And then Florida took the lead, and then in the second half ran away with it completely. And I think that now we're looking at a team that is finally figuring everything out. Hopefully they could keep it up, because this is a team that's been rather inconsistent. We're still a week or two away from Alex Condon, who, by the way, apparently potential first-round pick. Alex Condon, we're still a week or two away from him coming back from the ankle injury. Thomas Huck and Denzel Aberdeen have been absolute revelations for the team. And I wanted to save the best for last year. Like, I haven't said his name a single time here because I wanted to save the best for last. And I wanted to end on this note of giving him credit. Micah Handlogten returning is just incredible. Okay, Micah Handlogten, if you don't remember, crucial part to the 2023 team, as in 2023-2024 team season, against Auburn in the SEC championship, practically snapped his ankle, right? And it was just such a brutal injury. And we were told, hey, he's not going to come back this year. Like, he's in a red shirt medically. Okay. Does that. There was rumors for, I think, the Georgia game that people were reporting, hey, Micah Handlogten's going to be back for the Georgia game. And Todd Golden came out and he said, no, we're going to keep Micah Handlogten out for the year. Like, he's going to medically redshirt. Alex Condon got hurt, and Micah Handlogten had the unselfish decision. I don't care if it was his idea or someone else's idea. Micah Handlogten had made the unselfish decision to burn that medical red shirt and come back because the team needed him. I know that we've been told, hey, he's been cleared to play. We're just medically redshirting him to keep him eligible for next year. Hey, this is that, that's this. I know we've been told all that he's been cleared. He's been good to go. He's been wanting to go, but they're medically redshirting him for eligibility for next year. I get that. I do. But he could have stuck with that. But instead, Alex Condon got injured. And again, I don't know if he was the one that went to Todd Golden or if Todd Golden went to him. And personally, I don't care. Because ultimately, the decision that Micah Handlogten made was, my team needs me. I'm going to come back and play for them. And that kind of unselfish decision is incredible. To burn the medical red shirt to come back because your team needed you. I am so happy that when he made the shot against South Carolina, that the crowd went crazy for him, because he deserves a standing applause every time he checks in, or a standing ovation every time he checks in. He does. That type of unselfish decision is amazing for a college basketball player. I'm going to say football. For a college basketball player. That's incredible. And he deserves every bit of the... Like, if you see him on campus, just dap him up for me. Just do that, please. Just dap him up for me. You don't have to say it's for me. Just dap him up for me. And he deserves it all. He does. Incredibly unselfish decision. And this team just got even better. And when Alex Condon comes back, they will be even better again. It's awesome to see. This is a team that can make some magic happen this year. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day, every day. We are available daily and free. We're listening to the podcast and on YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Florida Gators. For Locked On Gators, I'm Brandon Olsen. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work for New York Giants on SI, and I'll see you all next time.